You think you can walk these streets like you own 'em? Get your hands where I can see. Officer Ray Collins roared, slamming the black teen into the patrol car so hard the metal groaned. What he didn't see was the dark green SUV rolling to a stop behind him. The door opened, and out stepped Colonel David Carter, full military uniform gleaming, medals catching the afternoon sun. His voice was low, steady, and lethal. "Get your hands off my son." The crowd froze. The officer's grip faltered. And for the first time that day, the balance of power shifted. The summer heat clung to the small town like a heavy blanket, making the air thick and sticky as the late afternoon sun blazed down on Main Street. 16-year-old Jamal Carter was just leaving the corner store, ice-cold soda in one hand and his backpack slung lazily over his shoulder, when the sharp squeal of tires cut through the quiet hum of cicadas. The black and white patrol car came to a hard stop just inches from the curb, the engine growling like a predator stalking its prey. Officer Ray Collins stepped out, his sunglasses catching the sunlight, reflecting Jamal's startled face back at him. "Hey, you!" Collins barked, his voice slicing through the air. Jamal froze mid-step, blinking as if trying to process who the officer was even talking to. "What's the problem, sir?" he asked, his voice cautious, but steady, the way his father had always told him to speak to authority. Collins didn't answer. He closed the distance between them in 4 heavy strides, the smell of stale coffee and sweat radiating off his uniform as he reached out and grabbed Jamal by the collar. The soda slipped from Jamal's hand, the can hissing as it hit the pavement and rolled under the patrol car. "Don't play dumb with me," Collins growled, shoving him hard against the hood of the cruiser. "You fit the description." Jamal's heart pounded against his ribs, his mind spinning. Description of what? He hadn't done anything. He had just bought a drink and was on his way home. "Sir, I think you've got the wrong." The rest of his sentence was cut off when Collins yanked his arm behind his back, the metal of the hood burning through the thin fabric of his T-shirt. "Stop resisting," the officer snapped, twisting harder. Pain shot through Jamal's shoulder, and he gritted his teeth to keep from crying out. A small group of onlookers began to gather on the sidewalk, an older woman clutching her grocery bags. A couple of teenagers holding up their phones. "What's he even doing?" One of them muttered, their voice carrying just enough for Jamal to hear. Collins shoved him again, pressing his chest into the hood, the heat from the metal searing his skin. "You think you can just walk around here like you own the place?" Collins sneered. "We don't need your kind causing trouble." Jamal's jaw tightened. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "Don't give them a reason. Keep your cool. Make it home." "I'm not causing trouble," he said quietly, but his voice shook despite himself. Collins slammed at the side of his head into the metal just enough to make the world blur at the edges. "I said, stop resisting." He barked again, the phrase sharp and mechanical, like he had rehearsed it 1,000 times. The crowd shifted uneasily. One man stepped forward, but Collins shot him a glare that made him hesitate. Somewhere a car horn honked in the distance, but it felt like the entire street had gone silent, holding its breath. Jamal's pulse thundered in his ears, his palms slick with sweat. He tried to focus on something, anything, to keep from panicking. The crack in the patrol car's paint near the headlight, the smell of asphalt baking in the sun, the faint hum of cicadas. Anything but the crushing weight of Collins' arm pressing into his back. Then, faint but growing louder, came the deep rumble of a large vehicle pulling up. Tires crunched against the gravelly edge of the street, and a dark green SUV eased to a stop just behind the patrol car. Jamal couldn't see it, but he could hear the low growl of its idling engine, steady and controlled. Collins barely glanced over his shoulder before focusing back on his grip, but the murmurs in the crowd picked up. The driver's side door opened with a heavy, deliberate click. A boot hit the pavement, polished, black, and military-issued. Another followed, the sound precise, like a march. The air seemed to shift as the figure stepped into view, the sunlight glinting off the rows of medals pinned neatly to his chest. A deep, authoritative voice cut through the heat, low but commanding enough to still the small crowd. "Get your hands off my son." Collins froze, the words hitting him like a sudden drop in temperature. Slowly, he turned his head to see the tall, broad-shouldered man in full military dress uniform, his cap tucked under one arm, his eyes locked on the officer with a kind of unblinking intensity that made weaker men falter. It was Colonel David Carter, a name that in this town carried weight. Jamal felt the grip on his arm loosen, just slightly, but Collins didn't step back. "Sir, this is police business," the officer said, his voice wavering just enough for Jamal to catch it. "Your son matches the description." "Of what?" Carter cut in, his tone sharp as a blade. "Of a teenager walking home from the store." He took a slow step forward, his boots clicking against the asphalt. The sunlight caught the silver in his close-cropped hair, the lines on his face etched deeper by years of service. "I've spent my life defending this country," Carter continued, his voice steady. "And I'll be damned if I watch someone like you treat my son like a criminal because of the color of his skin." The crowd had gone completely silent now, all eyes fixed on the two men. Collins shifted uncomfortably, his hand finally releasing Jamal's arm. Jamal straightened slowly, his muscles aching, but he didn't move toward his father. He knew this wasn't over. Collins cleared his throat. "Sir, I was just what?" Carter's voice boomed now, the weight of command unmistakable. "Just humiliating a kid in front of half the town? Just making sure everyone knows you can put your hands on him without cause." His gaze was unwavering, and for the first time Collins looked away. A car passed slowly on the opposite side of the street, its driver craning their neck to see what was happening. Someone in the crowd whispered, "That's his dad," as if the uniform and the medals weren't enough to make it obvious. Carter finally stepped closer to his son, his presence a wall between him and the officer. "You good, son?" he asked quietly, his voice softening for the first time. Jamal nodded, though his throat felt tight. "Yeah," he managed. But Carter's eyes scanned him up and down, taking in the scuffed T-shirt, the red mark on his arm, the way he was still breathing too fast. He turned back to Collins. "This isn't over," he said, the promise in his voice clear. "You've made a mistake that's going to follow you." Collins opened his mouth, but whatever excuse he was about to make died on his tongue when Carter stepped forward again, close enough that the officer had to tilt his head back slightly to maintain eye contact. The medals on Carter's chest caught the sun again, a silent reminder of a life spent earning respect, not demanding it. "Go ahead," Carter said quietly, but the words carried like thunder. "Try and put your hands on him again. See what happens." The tension in the air was almost unbearable. Then, without another word, Collins stepped back toward his patrol car, muttering something under his breath. He yanked the driver's side door open and slid inside, slamming it shut. The engine roared to life, and a moment later he pulled away, the tires spitting small pebbles into the gutter. Carter stood there for a long moment, watching him go. The crowd began to disperse slowly, conversation starting up again in low, hushed tones. Jamal exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes. His father finally turned to him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Let's go home," he said simply. But as they walked toward the SUV, Jamal knew that what had just happened wasn't going to fade quietly into the background of their lives. It was the start of something, a battle neither of them had chosen, but both of them were now unwilling to walk away from. The town pretended to breathe again after the patrol car sped off, but Jamal carried the imprint of the hood in his chest like a bruise that hadn't decided what color it wanted to be. The SUV's air conditioning blew cold against his overheated skin as his father pulled away from Main Street, hands steady at 10 and 2, jaw locked in a way that meant he was running calculations behind his eyes. Every stoplight turned red like it had been told to slow them down. Jamal stared at the can of soda rolling around by his feet. Carter pressed it into his hands the second he shut the door, saying, "Cold helps with shock," in that soft tone he'd used when Jamal fell off his bike in second grade. Jamal took a sip, and it tasted like metal. He didn't know if it was the can or the leftover tang of fear. His dad didn't speak until they turned into their neighborhood, rows of manicured lawns and identical mailboxes trying too hard to look peaceful. "You did good," Carter said finally. "You kept your voice even. You kept your hands visible. You stayed alive." Jamal nodded, but a lump caught in his throat, and he hated that his eyes stung. The SUV's engine ticked as it cooled in the driveway. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cleaner and the faint ghost of last night's garlic pasta. His mom's photo hung in the hallway, the one where she was laughing with her head thrown back, a memory caught mid-joy. Jamal touched the frame with 2 fingers on his way past, a ritual he hadn't outgrown. In the kitchen, Carter set his cap on the counter like it was something sacred and pulled his phone from his pocket. The messages had multiplied like insects missed calls, texts from neighbors, from members of Carter's unit, from a pastor named Williams, from an unknown number that sent a shaky video clip of the incident. Someone had filmed everything from the sidewalk, the grab, the shove, the words. Jamal watched himself on the tiny screen, small and pinned, like a bug under a glass. He didn't recognize the expression on his own face, somewhere between shock and the flattened calm he'd practiced his whole life. "We need to get ahead of this," Carter said, thumb hovering above a contact labeled ADM Morales. "Before the story writes itself without us." Jamal nodded again, numb and buzzing at the same time, a feeling like he'd stepped off a roller coaster, but his body hadn't figured out they were back on solid ground. "Am I in trouble?" he asked, the question small and childish the second it left his mouth, and it made him angry that he'd asked it at all. Carter's head snapped up. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Doesn't always matter," Jamal said, and the words hung between them, heavy with all the years of talk his father had carefully, painfully given him. Carter exhaled slowly, then tapped a quick message to Morales, another to Pastor Williams, and one more to a number at the base that Jamal knew belonged to a public affairs officer. "We'll handle this on all fronts," Carter murmured. "Legal, community, and narrative." Jamal drank more soda and let the cold sit on his tongue. His phone buzzed with messages. "Sean from the basketball team. Bro, you okay? Elisa from chemistry. I'm so sorry. I saw the video." An unknown number. Thug got what he deserved. He set the phone face down and stared at the wood grain of the table until the lines blurred. Carter's hand landed briefly on his shoulder. "You can talk or you can sit quiet. You get to choose your speed today." Jamal nodded and chose quiet. Evening crept in through the kitchen windows, turning the light a softer gold. Somewhere down the block, sprinklers she'd across a lawn. Carter made a plan out loud in the way he always did when the world tilted. Meet with the assistant district attorney first thing, file a formal complaint with internal affairs, schedule a visit with the school principal to get ahead of rumors before Jamal walked into a hallway full of eyes. "And we call Grandma," he added, and something in his voice softened further, because the last thing either of them needed was her seeing the video cold. They called. She prayed through tears, her words a quilt she stitched around them both, promising to cook on Sunday and to sit in the front pew with her spine straight and her hat tilted like a crown. After they hung up, Carter looked at Jamal like he was measuring him for a suit of armor. "You sleep tonight," he said. "We fight tomorrow." Jamal lay in bed fully dressed, shoes kicked off, staring at the ceiling where the glow-in-the-dark stars from elementary school still clung stubbornly to the paint. His hands kept replaying the exact angle his wrists had been yanked, the way the word resisting had been used like a hammer, trying to shape him into a narrative that fit someone else's comfort. He must have drifted off, because when his phone buzzed again, the room was darker, and the house had settled into its nighttime creaks. A new video longer, from a different angle. In this one, you could see his father stepping out of the SUV, the uniform coming into frame like a verdict. The comments were a war zone below. "Salute to that man. Bet the kid was mouthing off. This is why nothing changes. Protect black children." You don't know what led up to it. He scrolled far enough to feel sick, then forced himself to stop. He wanted to text Sean back to say something normal, like, "Yeah, I'm fine," but it felt like lying, and Jamal had promised himself a long time ago he wouldn't lie just to make other people comfortable. At breakfast, Carter wore a faded unit T-shirt and the expression that meant he'd slept, but only in segments. "We go see Morales first," he said, sliding scrambled eggs onto Jamal's plate. Jamal took a few bites out of politeness and out of love. The assistant district attorney's office was a floor of glass and carpet that swallowed your footsteps. Morales was a compact woman with sharp eyes and a scar across one knuckle that made her handshake feel like something earned. She shook Jamal's hand like he mattered, then gestured to chairs. "I saw the video," she said, her voice even. "We'll review everything, including body cam if it's on." She stopped herself and made a face that said if. "We'll request it," she corrected. She listened to Jamal's account without interrupting, only asking him to slow down once to capture a detail about the first grab. When he finished, her pen hovered. "They always say stop resisting," she murmured, more to herself than to them, then looked up. "We'll open a complaint, and we'll push for release of all footage. I'll also refer you to a civil rights attorney if you want to pursue separate action." Carter nodded. "We do." Morales gave them a folder with a neat list stapled inside. Documents to gather, timelines, what to expect, what not to do. As they stood, she added, "For what it's worth, my little brother is 16. I hate that I have to tell him the same things you've told your son. But you did right by him yesterday." In the elevator, Jamal felt a thread of something like relief pulled tight in his chest. Not happiness, not even hope exactly, just the sense that there were adults in the building who understood the rules and would read them out loud. Next was the school. The principal, Mr. Landry, had the gentle voice of a former English teacher and the politics of a man who didn't like shaking boats. He wrung his hands a lot when he was nervous. Today, his knuckles were pale. "I want you to know you're safe here," he began, and Jamal nodded because that's what you do in offices with inspirational posters. Landry added, "We'll address any harassment immediately," and Carter cut in, "We don't need statements, we need policies." And then they were talking specifics, where Jamal could go if the hallway got too loud, who he should text if he felt cornered, what the consequence was for any student who shoved a phone in his face to demand his side. They left with a plan that sounded sterile and useful, which was probably the best schools could do on short notice. Jamal's stomach unclenched a fraction when he saw Sean by the lockers, eyebrows lifted in a question that didn't force an answer. "You coming to practice?" Sean asked, like nothing had happened, and like everything had. Jamal surprised himself by saying, "Yeah," because the echo of sneakers on varnished wood had always been the quickest way to quiet his brain. Practice was run and cut, sweat in his eyes. Coach blowing the whistle with an urgency that said he'd told the team beforehand to keep things normal. When Jamal sank a 3 at the buzzer, the gym erupted in the easy kind of noise that didn't ask for anything. It held for a second, warm and simple, then popped like a soap bubble when the gym doors swung open and a police officer stepped in. Not Collins. Another officer with a face like weathered stone and a patience that said he hadn't come to arrest anyone. He'd come to intimidate. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching. Coach's whistle fell silent. The ball bounced once, twice, then died. Jamal felt the tremor start in his calves. The officer left without speaking 3 minutes later, but the message stayed. "We can be anywhere." "They're circling the wagons," Carter said that evening after Jamal told him. He looked out the front window like he expected to see a cavalry of squad cars. "Good," he added, surprising Jamal. "It means they're scared enough to make mistakes." The next day, Pastor Williams hosted a gathering in the church basement, folding chairs in rows and a podium that smelled like old polish. Neighbors filled the room, Miss Geraldine with her grocery bags, Mr. CHU from the corner store, a cluster of teens who'd filmed but looked suddenly small in the fluorescent light. Carter stood at the back, letting the pastor take the microphone. Williams had the kind of voice that could bless and cut in the same breath. He spoke about dignity, about how the town's story had always included a chapter, where the powerful forgot who they serve. He asked Jamal if he wanted to say something. Jamal hadn't planned to speak. The thought glued his tongue to the roof of his mouth. But he stood anyway, the chairs creaking as people turned. "I'm not brave," he said, which wasn't what he'd meant to say at all. He swallowed and tried again. "I was scared. I did what my dad taught me. And I'm tired, not just from yesterday, from all the yesterdays." He waited for his voice to break. It didn't. "I just want to get home alive, and I want my friends to get home alive, and I want to not feel like every day is an exam where the wrong answer is my life." Silence, then a wave of amens that felt like hands on his back. After a civil rights attorney named Naomi Alvarez introduced herself, her handshake firm, her eyes bright behind rectangular glasses. "We'll file the civil suit," she said, already scrolling through her calendar. "And we'll file the motion to compel the body cam video. If it's mysteriously off, that's a record too." "There's more," a woman in a denim jacket said from behind them, voice shaking with fury. "I saw Collings last month push a kid into a squad car so hard the boy's head hit the frame. No video that time, but I was there." Alvarez turned toward her like a magnet. "Give me your number," she said. "All of it matters." It felt like momentum, the kind that builds slow and then all at once. Which is why the voicemail hit like ice water when Carter played it that night, an unlisted number. A voice distorted like it had been run through gravel. "Pull the complaint," it rasped. "Send the boy to apologize, or we'll make sure your family learns its place." Carter replayed it twice, then saved it, because that's what professionals do. He forwarded it to Morales with a time stamp. He turned to Jamal and said, "We're not retreating." And something in his eyes, something finally not only steel, but fire made Jamal swallow hard and nod. They started noticing the cars again. Not at first, because life was busy with forms and practice and church and homework and the way your body insists on hunger even when your mind is tangled. But after a week, they realized the same dark sedan showed up 2 lanes over on their commute. The same slow roll past their house at 9 p.m. and again near midnight. The same shadow at the corner by the bus stop. "Document, don't confront," Carter said, sliding into procedures like a well-worn coat. He bought a dash cam. He told Grandma to let the phone ring twice and hang up if a number she didn't know called after 9. He walked the perimeter of the house at dusk with that particular way of moving he'd learned in places that had taught him vigilance wasn't paranoia, but survival. On Friday, Morales called with a sliver of news that wasn't small at all. The body cam had been turned on late 26 seconds after first contact. "But it caught the shove," she said, "and his face when your father arrived. That matters." Alvarez called an hour later, triumphant. "We got the court date for the motion. The judge is old school but fair." Carter allowed himself a smile that cracked the granite of his features. They celebrated with takeout and a movie that none of them really watched. Jamal laughed twice at jokes that weren't funny, just because the laughter felt like proof he still could. He fell asleep on the couch, woke to his father draping a blanket over him, and for a moment he was 10 again, and the world was small enough to hold in 2 hands. The doorbell rang at 1:13 Amen. Not the friendly ding-dong of daylight, but an insistent press and hold that woke the dog next door and sent fear like electricity through the walls. Jamal sat up, heart stumbling, the room too dark and too bright at once. Carter was already up, already moving, his hand lifting in a silent stay behind him. The doorbell rang again, a longer buzz this time, followed by a slow, deliberate knock that sounded like the front door was being told a secret. Carter stopped at the hall table, opened the drawer, and pulled out his uniform cap. He didn't put it on. He held it in his left hand the way he had on Main Street, the brim aligned with the edge of his palm like a line he was drawing in the world. He glanced back at Jamal, and in that look Jamal read 100 messages. "Stay behind me. We have done nothing wrong. Do not let them script you." Outside, blue light pulsed against the living room walls in slow, tidal breaths. A voice called through the door, muffled but edged with command. "Open up, Mr. Carter." We need to ask your son a few questions about an incident." Jamal's stomach dropped, cold and clean. Another voice, slicker, too friendly, added, "Let's not make this harder." Carter set his jaw, slid the chain into place, and cracked the door just enough to show his silhouette against the blue. "What incident?" he asked, voice level, uniform in his hand like a reminder of an oath. The answer wasn't words at first. It was the sound of more engines idling at the curb, the whisper of boots on grass, the knowledge that this was no casual visit. When the officer finally spoke, his tone held a satisfaction that made Jamal's skin crawl. "A report of assault on an officer," he said, "from last week. Officer Collins is ready to make a formal statement." Jamal felt the house tilt under his feet, the story trying to rearrange itself around him like a noose. Carter didn't move. "That's a lie," he said quietly, every syllable rehearsed by a lifetime of standing his ground. "And I advise you to step off my porch until my attorney arrives." The pause stretched, then snapped. "If you don't cooperate," the voice said, "we'll have to bring him in." The blue light washed their faces again, soft and oceanic, and somewhere in the distance a siren wailed like the night was warning them that what comes next won't be quiet. The air in the hallway was thick enough to taste, heavy with the electric charge of two men standing their ground while the world outside pressed in. Carter didn't blink, didn't lean, didn't open the door any wider than the precise crack he'd chosen. The brim of his uniform cap stayed perfectly aligned with the edge of his hand, a quiet but unmistakable signal that he was not here as a civilian being intimidated. He was here as a soldier guarding his post. "You'll get nothing from my son without legal counsel present," Carter said, his voice low and unyielding. "You can leave or you can wait in your vehicle until my attorney arrives. Those are your options." The lead officer, a tall man with a jaw like a cinder block, shifted his weight, clearly not used to being given terms. Mr. Carter refusing to cooperate could make this a lot harder on everyone involved. Carter's eyes narrowed just enough to sharpen his expression into something lethal. "I've spent 24 years in service to this country. I know exactly how hard things can get. Now you tell Officer Collins to keep his lies straight before he puts them on paper." Behind him, Jamal's fists were clenched so tightly his nails dug crescents into his palms. Every instinct screamed at him to speak up, to tell them they were twisting the truth, but he stayed silent, letting his father carry the weight of the moment. The standoff stretched for long, brittle seconds. Finally, the officer's gaze flicked toward the cluster of blue lights on the street, where more uniforms waited in the shadows. Without another word, he stepped back, letting the door swing shut. Carter slid the chain out, locked the deadbolt, and turned, his face unreadable until his eyes found Jamal. "Upstairs," he said simply. Jamal obeyed, but he paused halfway up, catching the sound of his father dialing a number and speaking in clipped, precise sentences to someone Alvarez, maybe, or Morales. He didn't catch all the words, but the tone was pure operational. "They're escalating. Same car from earlier in the week, false pretense for arrest. Need statements from witnesses on record." Jamal's room felt smaller than usual, the glow-in-the-dark stars almost childish under the weight of the night. He sat on the bed and listened to the muffled rumble of his father's voice downstairs, then the low growl of an engine starting outside. Curtains barely parted. He caught the sight of the blue lights retreating, shrinking into the distance until the street was once again dark and quiet. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the calm before someone decided to push harder. Morning came with a sky the color of ash. Over breakfast, Carter outlined the plan like a mission briefing, extra locks on the doors, dashcam footage downloaded nightly, all phones on record mode if approached. Jamal nodded through every point, the clink of his spoon against the bowl loud in the still kitchen. "And today," Carter added, "we go on a fence." That meant an early meeting with Alvarez at her downtown office, a space lined with floor-to-ceiling files and a whiteboard crowded with dates, case numbers, and the kind of shorthand only lawyers understood. She greeted them with a firm handshake and no small talk. "They're baiting you," she said without preamble. hoping for a slip, a raised voice, anything they can spin into resisting or obstruction. She tapped the edge of her desk. We don't give them that. We stay 3 steps ahead. Jamal sat through the strategy session, trying to absorb the terms, depositions, discovery, injunctions, while Alvarez mapped out the next month like a battle plan. At one point she looked directly at him. "You are the client," she said. "This is about your rights, your safety, and your future. Don't let them convince you otherwise." From there they headed to Pastor Williams' church, where the basement now looked less like a meeting space and more like a command center. Folding tables were pushed together under a web of extension cords powering laptops, printers, and a portable scanner. Volunteers sorted through printouts, organizing statements from witnesses who'd come forward after seeing the video. The woman in the denim jacket was there, leaning over a form with her brow furrowed. She looked up when Jamal entered, offering a small nod. "We're building the record," Williams explained. "Every piece of this matters. They want to make it your word against. Our job is to make sure it's your word and 50 others against one." Jamal scanned the room, the hum of quiet determination settling over him. It was strange, seeing his name on forms, his face in still frames on a laptop screen, like he'd become a piece of evidence instead of just a person. As the hours passed, the story began to spread beyond the walls of their town. A local news crew showed up, cameras and boom mics in tow. The reporter, a young black woman with a steady gaze, asked to speak to Jamal. Carter's eyes flicked to him, and for the first time since Main Street, he saw the choice reflected back at him. Jamal took a breath and stepped in front of the camera. "My name is Jamal Carter," he began, his voice steadier than he expected. "I'm 16 years old. Last week I was slammed into a patrol car for buying a soda. I'm here because my father taught me to stand my ground, and because no one's child should have to survive what I did just to get home." The reporter asked what he wanted to see happen. Jamal didn't have to think. "I want the truth," he said, "and I want it on record so the next kid doesn't have to be brave just to stay alive." That night, the story aired on the 6 o'clock news. By 8, it was online. By midnight, it had been shared thousands of times, comments flooding in from people who'd never heard of their town but recognized the shape of the story. Carter sat at the kitchen table scrolling through reactions, his expression a mix of pride and the careful calculation of a man who knew visibility was both shield and target. The next morning, the first D threat came through the church's voicemail. By afternoon, Williams' inbox was full of messages ranging from solidarity to venom. Carter didn't tell Jamal all of it, but he didn't have to. The way his father's eyes tracked every unfamiliar car on their street told the whole story. The harassment escalated in subtle, needling ways. A trash can tipped over in the night, mail missing from the box, the dog next door barking at shadows that lingered too long. Alvarez advised them to log everything, and they did, times, dates, even the sound of footsteps outside their windows. One evening, Carter walked out to the SUV and found the tires slashed clean through. The look on his face when he came back inside wasn't surprise. It was confirmation. "They're trying to break rhythm," he told Jamal, "but we hold the tempo." The pressure built, and with it came moments Jamal couldn't have predicted, like the day at school when a younger student, barely a freshman, stopped him in the hallway just to say, "My brother saw your interview." He said it gave him hope. The words lodged somewhere deep in Jamal's chest, both a weight and a lift. The week before the court hearing for the motion to release the full body cam footage, Alvarez called with a tone that was half victory, half warning. "Collins has a new statement," she said. "It contradicts his first one in 3 places. That's good for us, but it also means they're tightening their circle." Carter leaned over the speakerphone. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Alvarez said. "We may see another move to discredit Jamal before the hearing. Stay alert." Alert became the new normal. Even at basketball practice, Jamal caught himself scanning the bleachers for unfamiliar faces. On a Thursday evening, 2 days before the hearing, he spotted one, a man in plain clothes, sitting alone, watching without reaction. When Jamal pointed him out to Coach, the man was gone before anyone else could see him. That night, as Jamal sat in his room scrolling through homework on his laptop, a notification popped up. An email from an address he didn't recognize, subject line blank. Against his better judgment, he clicked. The message contained only a single link. His stomach knotted, but his hand clicked anyway. The screen filled with grainy footage security camera video from outside the corner store the day of the incident. It showed him walking out, soda in hand. Then, from another angle, Collins pulling up, stepping out, striding toward him. The clip froze just before the grab, a blinking cursor below the image. Then words appeared one by one. Next time, no witnesses. Jamal's hands went cold. He closed the laptop and sat in the dim light, listening for his father downstairs. When Carter came up, Jamal showed him without a word. His father's face didn't change, but his voice was steel. Print it. Save it. Forward it to Alvarez. Jamal obeyed, the printer spitting out the threat in black and white, the paper warm in his hands. Carter took it, slid it into a folder already thick with evidence, and looked at his son. "They think they can scare us quiet," he said. "They don't understand what happens when you push a soldier's family." That night, neither of them slept much. Outside, the street was silent, but it was the kind of silence that hummed with things unsaid. In the early hours before dawn, Jamal stood at his window and watched the horizon bleed from black to gray, wondering if the day ahead would bring another threat or the first crack in the wall they were pushing against. He didn't know that within 48 hours the fight would spill into a place they couldn't control, under lights brighter than they'd ever wanted, and with an audience far larger than their small town. The courthouse gleamed like a polished tooth under a sky the color of cold steel, and the steps were already crowded when Jamal and his father arrived. Church hats and hoodies, suits and sneakers, homemade signs with careful letters that said "Protect our kids," and "We saw the tape," and another, painted fast and furious, that simply read enough. Carter parked 2 blocks away and walked Jamal in with a steadying hand at the boy's shoulder, the cadence of his steps setting a metronome that held Jamal's breathing in time. Cameras pivoted. A reporter tried to thrust a microphone forward, but Alvarez intercepted with a smile that had edges, guiding them through the metal detectors and into the cool marble belly of the building. Inside, the line to Department 7 snaked past portraits of judges whose eyes followed you with the suspicion of oil paint. Ada Morale stood near the door, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled into a no-nonsense knot, flipping through a stack of motions with fluorescent tabs like battle flags. She greeted Carter with a quick clasp of hands and pointed Jamal to a bench against the wall. "It's a motion to compel release of the full body cam. All angles, all audio," she said under her breath. "Union counsel is going to claim ongoing investigation. Officer safety, you know the hymn. Judge Ellison hates that hymn." The door opened and a bayleaf called the case. They filed in, the room a box of tense air and wooden pews. Collins sat at the defense table in a suit that fit too tight at the neck, jaw shaved clean, eyes flicking toward Jamal with the look he tried to flatten into boredom and failed. Beside him, the Union lawyer, a broad-shouldered man with slicked hair, adjusted his cufflinks as if precision could be confused with virtue. Jamal slid into the front row with his father on one side and Pastor Williams on the other, their presence bracketing him like parentheses that would not let the sentence of this day be misread. Judge Ellison entered, a tall woman with iron gray hair and a posture that made the bench look like a high-backed captain's chair. She listened to opening remarks with the kind of stillness that unsettled people who weren't used to being made to wait for their own voices. Union counsel stood and sang from the hymnal just as Morales predicted. Ongoing investigation, safety, reputational harm, privacy of third parties, each phrase polished by years of repetition. Morales rose and answered like a scalpel, slicing the hymn into thin, discredited ribbons. Community interest, pattern allegations, prior discipline history subject to discovery, the public's right to understand conduct by those sworn to protect it. Alvarez, allowed as intervener for Jamal's civil action, added a brief like a dagger. "There's already footage in the public domain, Your Honor." Delay here only benefits those who would manipulate narrative with partial truths. At the bench, Ellison steepled her fingers. "Sergeant Collins," she said, and his neck twitched in surprise. "In your supplemental declaration, you claim you activated your body camera as soon as practicable. Define practicable for the court." He glanced at counsel, then back to the judge. "As soon as I was able, given the threat level." "The threat," Ellison said, "being a 16-year-old with a soda?" A murmur rolled through the gallery. The judge's eyes cut it off with a glance sharp enough to slice. "Here's what we're going to do," she said, turning back to the parties. "I'm ordering release of the full unredacted body camera footage from all responding officers for the time period beginning 2 minutes before the officer's arrival and ending 5 minutes after the conclusion of the stop. I'm also ordering production of dispatch audio, CAD logs, and any contemporaneous communications between officers on scene. Unless the city can articulate a specific, non-speculative safety threat to a named individual, I'm not inclined to buy the parade of horribles. You have 48 hours. Union counsel sputtered about appeals and stays. Ellison looked at the clock. "You can file whatever you like. The order stands pending any higher court intervention. Next." The gavel's soft rap might as well have been a starting gun. Outside, the sun had climbed and the steps had thickened with bodies. Word traveled faster than paper. By the time Jamal and Carter reached the bottom step, the crowd was chanting the judge's 48 hours like an incantation. Microphones bloomed again. Alvarez took point, Morales beside her, answering questions with careful restraint. Jamal felt heat press at the back of his neck and looked over his shoulder. Collins had emerged, flanked by 2 officers. A camera caught the way his eyes snagged on Jamal. The look wasn't boredom now. It was a promise that someone intended to collect a debt. Carter saw it, too. He didn't touch Jamal, didn't break stride, but his presence thickened, posture broadening subtly, making himself a taller wall. They made it to the SUV. As Carter pulled into traffic, a horn blared behind them, long, petulant. A dark sedan slid into the lane 2 cars back. Jamal didn't say it, he didn't have to. His father adjusted the rearview mirror. "Document," he said. "Don't feed it." Back at the church, the basement hummed like a newsroom. A volunteer had found the judge's order already uploaded to the docket system. Someone printed copies and pinned one to a corkboard. William stood with a half-eaten sandwich in one hand and a phone in the other, writing a new service outline for Sunday that blended prayer with policy, like bread with salt. "This is a pivot," he told Jamal. "It's not the finish line. But you can see the curve of the track from here." In the afternoon, the next blow landed. Coach texted Jamal to come by the gym. They were doing film review before practice. When Jamal and Carter stepped into the hall, the air felt wrong too still, like a forest where the birds had stopped mid-song. The principal stood with 2 uniformed officers and a school safety resource officer whose smile felt like a laminated poster of one. Landry's hands worked as if wringing out a dishcloth. "Jamal," he started, "there's been a report." The sentence trailed off into a place where specifics might be dangerous. The resource officer's tone was smooth as glass. "We received a tip that contraband was placed in a student's locker. We need to conduct a search." Jamal felt the floor tilt. Carter didn't blink. "On what basis?" "Anonymous tip. We're within our authority." Carter's answer was a catalog of law. "Not without reasonable suspicion tied to a named source or exigent circumstances. This is a public school building, not a checkpoint. Principal Landry, you know your own policy." Landry swallowed. "There is discretion for safety concerns." "Then you'll exercise it by requiring specificity," Carter said, voice velvet over iron. "We will not consent to a fishing expedition." The officers exchanged a look. "If you don't cooperate, we'll get a warrant," one said. "Do that," Carter replied. "And when you can't articulate probable cause, we'll add it to the pile." The standoff ripened in the fluorescent light. Students slowed as they passed, sensing a temperature they couldn't name. The resource officer's smile thinned. "We'll be back," he said, and the trio retreated, shoes squeaking on waxed linoleum. Landry exhaled as if he'd been underwater. "I protect your students," Carter said, not unkindly. "All of them." In the gym, Coach had kept the kids on court to avoid the hall show. He ran them hard, kept their eyes on screens and footwork. Jamal powered through, grateful for the dictatorship of drills that replaced thought with motion. After practice, Sean slapped his shoulder. "You good?" Jamal wanted to say yes. He said, "I'm here." They left by the back lot. The sun was a coin melting into the horizon, clouds smeared in orange and red like a warning flare. As they crossed to the SUV, the dark sedan from earlier eased into the far corner of the lot and idled. Carter pretended not to see it. He unlocked the doors, ushered Jamal in, and pulled out with the calm of a man diffusing a wire no one else could see. "They're escalating toward a pretext," he said quietly once they were on the road. "We will not hand it to them." At home, Alvarez called with a new tremor, in her voice not fear. "Exactly. Urgency. We got partial dispatch audio," she said. "The city dumped it thinking it helps them. It doesn't. There's a gap exactly 30 seconds right before Collins makes first contact, and then a female dispatcher saying copy, camera rolling, like someone reminded him. They're going to have to explain the gap." Carter's mouth twitched at the corner, the beginning of a smile that knew better than to complete itself. "And the union?" "Filed an emergency petition with the appellate court to stay release," Alvarez said. "We'll respond tonight. Judge on duty hates games even more than Ellison does." Williams put them on speaker at the church as they drafted statements. The basement buzzed with the choreography of a small town discovering its spine. The woman in the denim jacket showed up with another witness, this one a store clerk who'd been too afraid to come forward earlier. He described a pattern that tasted bitterly familiar. Same officer, same words, same hands. Morales, back at her office, texted a string of timestamps like coordinates on a map. Jamal found himself doing something strange. He started to breathe into the spaces between alarms. He could feel the fear in his body, yes, but he could also feel something else growing beside it, a sturdier thing that didn't depend on adrenaline or luck. It felt like belonging to a line of people who had decided, again and again across years, to be seen even when seeing came with a cost. Near midnight, the appellate court denied the union's stay with a one-page order that read like a door slammed against a foot. Alvarez sent a photo of it to the group thread. A cheer went up in the basement, tired and fierce. Williams closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you," to the ceiling, as if the old plaster had jurisdiction over justice. The celebration evaporated when the first siren wailed in the distance. Not the single hungry cry of an ambulance, but the layered sound of vehicles gathering. Carter's phone lit with a motion alert from their front porch camera. 4 figures in dark clothing approaching, badges glinting like teeth. "They're at the house," he said, already moving. Jamal's body answered with a cold, clean focus that reminded him of the last seconds before a shot at the buzzer. You could feel your heartbeat and your breath at the same time, the two metronomes aligning. In the SUV, Carter drove not fast but precise. Every turn signal clicked, every speed limit respected. The sirens grew louder in the windshield until they were a physical thing pressing at your chest from the outside. They turned onto their street and saw the blue ribbon of light draped over their house, squad cars angled like chess pieces around a king. Neighbors dotted the sidewalks, some in robes, some with phones raised, all with the posture of people who know they are about to be told to go back inside. Carter parked 2 houses down and stepped out in one fluid movement. He did not reach for the glove box. He did not make extra gestures. He moved with the choreography that had saved his life in other theaters. Then he did a thing that changed the air. He opened the back, lifted the garment bag he'd stowed there 2 days ago, and pulled out his dress uniform. On the quiet of the curb, under the pulse of blue, he put it on with the liturgy of a ritual. Shirt smoothed, tie cinched, jacket settled, medals pinned, cap in hand. Jamal watched his father assemble himself into an emblem that meant more than any one person, watched the neighbors straighten without knowing they were doing it, watched even the officers' faces hesitate, as if recognizing a flag. Carter took Jamal's hand for a single second, squeezed once their private code for "I'm here," and then walked up the driveway. An officer with a clipboard stepped forward, eyes flicking to the rows of metal across Carter's chest, recalibrating in real time. "Mr. Carter," he said, tone formal in a way it had not been the last time they knocked. "We have a warrant for the arrest of your son, Jamal Carter, in connection with an assault on a peace officer." The words rattled like a lid on a boiling pot. Jamal felt his name hit his ears and bounce back from the house's brick, felt the crowd's intake of breath gather like a storm inhaling. Alvarez's car swung to the curb so fast the tires chirped, door flying open before the engine cut. She strode up, hair loosened from the clip, face lit by a fury that had a law degree. "Let me see the warrant," she said, and the officer held it just out of reach. "You can read it," he offered. "I'll hold." She read, her mouth pressed into a line. "This is garbage," she said, loud enough for the microphones that it already materialized. "Signed an hour ago, based on a statement contradicted by your own dispatch audio. You come to arrest a child in the middle of the night for headlines." The neighbor crowd tightened, like fabric gathering under a seamstress's hand. Williams stepped closer, phone up, live stream icon glowing. Morale's sedan turned the corner, her face a thunderhead, her presence another piece in a formation that looked less like a family alone and more like a phalanx. The officer with the clipboard tried to push past addiction toward action. "We're taking him in," he said. Carter's voice didn't rise, but the room of the world seemed to listen when he spoke. "No," he said, and it wasn't defiance so much as a correction. "You will not put hands on my son in this doorway. You will stand on that sidewalk while counsel contacts the duty judge for an emergency quash. You will note the presence of multiple witnesses and recording devices. And you will remember," he paused, not for drama, but to let his words find the ribs of everyone within earshot, "that your oath binds you to the Constitution, not to a man who can't keep his story straight." A hush fell so complete that even the sirens seemed to recede, the way ocean noise drops when the wave crests. For a heartbeat, the scene held its breath, everyone suspended between two possible futures, the one where fear writes the next sentence, and the one where courage does. Then a new sound cut across the lawn, low and mean, the thrum of a heavier engine turning onto the street, a tactical van nosing in behind the cruisers like a dark idea made metal. Doors slid, boots hit pavement, and from the far end of the block another sound rose to meet it, the rustle and murmur of more neighbors pouring out, more phones lifting, more lights winking on in windows, an entire street refusing to be a backdrop. Carter lifted his cap, set it on his head, squared it by touch, and took one step forward onto the top stair, placing himself between the officers and his boy as the tactical team fanned out and the night drew itself tight as a drum, waiting to see who would strike first. The night had a weight to it now, a pressure that pressed down on skin and bone, a signal that the smallest wrong move could turn a tense standoff into something irreversible. The tactical team spread in practiced formation, rifles slung low but ready, faces hidden behind tinted shields. The cruiser's blue and red lights pulsed against the house's brick, flickering like warning beacons over the crowd of neighbors who refused to move back. Jamal stood just inside the doorway, framed by the light spilling from the living room, every muscle coiled tight, eyes fixed on his father's back. Carter stood tall on the porch, dress uniform sharp under the wash of patrol lights, cap squared, hands visible at his sides. "This doesn't need to happen here," he said, voice even but carrying to the far end of the block. "You know it, and I know it. Stand down and let the process work." One of the tactical officers stepped forward, visor hiding his expression, the soft crunch of boots on gravel loud in the stillness. "Warrant stands. You can make this easy or you can make this hard." Carter's gaze didn't waver. Hard for who? The officer's grip tightened on his weapon, but before he could speak, Alvarez's voice sliced through the night like a steel cable snapping. Hold your position. She was on her phone, pacing the edge of the lawn. Judge on the line. Duty court, emergency motion to quash in progress. Every one of you better hope your badge number isn't in the transcript if you move before this call ends. The tactical line hesitated, shifting weight from one foot to the other. Behind them, the crowd's murmurs grew louder live streams, catching every flicker of light, every turn of a head. The woman in the denim jacket had her phone up, her feed climbing past 1,000 viewers, the comments filling faster than she could read them. Morales pulled up in her sedan, braking hard enough to squeal, and strode into the yard with a file folder in one hand. New evidence, she announced loudly enough for the mix. 30 seconds of missing audio before first contact, dispatch asking if body cam was rolling, and a supplemental witness statement that Collings shoved the kid before a single word was exchanged. The lead officer's jaw tightened. We have a warrant, and I have probable cause for a false report and abuse of authority, Morales snapped. Your call which one you want to explain to the chief when this makes national headlines. For the first time, the tactical line faltered. A man in the back, helmet visor lifted, murmured something to his commander. The commander's eyes flicked to the crowd, then to the cameras, then back to Carter, who hadn't moved an inch. Lower weapons, the commander ordered finally. The click of safeties disengaging echoed like a crack of thunder in reverse. Alvarez turned back toward the porch, phone still pressed to her ear. Judge says quash granted pending formal hearing tomorrow. They have no authority to remove Jamal from the premises tonight. The crowd erupted cheers, claps, voices calling Carter's name. But Carter's eyes stayed locked on the officers, waiting to see if anyone would break formation. Slowly the tactical team pulled back, retreating to the van. Engines started. The cruisers peeled away one by one, leaving behind only the glow of porch lights and the low buzz of neighbors still filming. Carter turned then, looking at Jamal for the first time since stepping outside. His face was still composed, but his eyes carried the kind of relief you only let out in private. Inside, he said quietly. The moment the door closed, Jamal felt his knees give, the adrenaline leaving his body like water draining from a cracked cup. He sank into the couch, chest heaving, hands trembling despite himself. Carter crouched in front of him, setting the cap aside. That, he said, is what standing your ground looks like. It's not shouting, it's not shoving back. It's making them choose the law over the lie. Jamal swallowed hard, trying to hold on to the steadiness in his father's voice. What about tomorrow? Tomorrow, Carter said. We walk into that hearing with every witness, every piece of evidence, and the eyes of half the country watching. He stood, glancing toward the window where the street outside was still alive with movement. And they'll know we're not easy targets. Upstairs, Jamal lay in bed, but couldn't close his eyes. His mind replayed every sound from the night, the hum of the tactical van's engine, the muffled orders, Alvarez's voice on the phone, the metallic click when weapons were lowered. It was all still too close, too sharp. He checked his phone and saw the live stream replay, already racking up hundreds of thousands of views. Headlines were spreading, military father defends son from nighttime arrest, body cam evidence questioned, Officer Collings under scrutiny. In the comments, strangers argued about facts they didn't have, but between them were messages that pierced through the noise. We see you. We're with you. Stay strong. Just before dawn, Carter knocked softly and opened the door. He didn't turn on the light. Get some rest, he said. Today's going to be long. Jamal sat up. You think they'll show up again? Carter leaned against the doorframe. If they do, it'll be in front of a judge. And that's where we make our stand. Morning came bright and cold. The courthouse steps twice as crowded as before, this time with news vans parked nose to tail along the curb. The hearing moved too fast for Collings' counsel to find a new angle. The judge upheld the quash, ordered all evidence preserved, and set a date for a full review of the charges against the officer. When the gavel fell, the gallery broke into applause before the bailiff could quiet them. Outside, microphones swarmed, questions flew, but Carter only said, "We trust the process. when the process works for the people it's meant to protect. Today was one of those days. We'll be back for the rest. That night, the neighborhood gathered on the Carters' lawn, not in protest, but in solidarity. Folding chairs and crockpots, music low, people talking and laughing in the warm wash of porch light. Jamal stood among them, feeling the knot in his chest loosen for the first time in days. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they had pushed back, and for now, they were still standing. Carter came up beside him, arms folded, watching the crowd. "You did good," he said. "We did good," Jamal corrected, and his father's small smile said he agreed. Somewhere down the street, a car engine turned over and drove away, the sound fading into the night. For the first time, Jamal didn't follow it with his eyes.